cars being impounded, etc., etc. But it's a good step, and it's a good step to get people on the right path to taking their debt seriously, so that it doesn't actually continue to grow and ruin their lives.
I call the honourable member Stuart Nash.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, I've just got a couple of questions on this, and they're really process questions, practical questions. I wouldn't mind the Minister and the Chair answering a couple of them. I would like to talk about 91C here on page 33. We're talking about clause 43. And this is the warning notice to be served on the defendant. Now, it may interest people in the gallery, or wherever, watching, that initially this actually warning notice was to be sent to the defendant, but the Select Committee changed this to being served on the defendant. And what was crossed out, the interesting part here is what was actually crossed out. And what was in this Act initially, in this bill initially, it said, by delivering it to the defendant or by sending it to the defendant by ordinary post or by electronic means. But, Mr. Chairman, what the Select Committee obviously decided is that was not a robust enough system to ensure compliance or to ensure that the defendant could actually say with hand on heart, I had received this message. So it left an opening there for someone to slide on through to deflect their responsibility. And as I was saying before, this is all about accepting responsibility. But there are a couple of practical issues here that I wouldn't mind the Minister answering, because they are quite significant. We have heard that there are $672 million in outstanding fines. Now that is an astronomical amount, $672 million in outstanding fines. But we have also heard, and again this comes down to 91C, that now what has to happen is that warning notice has to be served on the defendant. What that means is that, I'm assuming, a policeman or a bailiff has to go, well, it says in here, has to go to the person's place of residence, hand them that notice. If they are not at their place of residence, and they have to hand that notice to a person who is over the age of 14, or if the person refuses to accept that notice, there has to be proven that there is, they reasonably tried to deliver that. So there is no excuse for not delivering it. Actually, Part 3 actually says no driver licence stop order imposed on a person is invalid merely because the notice was not received by that person or was received, but that's beside the point. My questions are, how is this actually going to be done? Now, 672 million, we're talking about a lot of people here. We're talking about a lot of people. How is this actually going to be resourced? Are the police going to dedicate a certain team of people to, because I assume this is all retrospective as well, if you have a fine outstanding as of now, once this bill is passed into law, then you are liable to get one of these driver licence stop orders. Oh, sorry, Mr. Chair. A person who has an outstanding fine may well be liable, or will be liable, to receive one of these stop orders. And they don't know when they're going to get them. They don't know when they're going to get them. But I'm wondering if, in fact, the Ministry of Justice has a process in place or has a suggested timeline on how long it will actually take them to police this, how long it will actually take, or how the resource needed to actually deliver every single one of these to a perpetrator's place of residence and sign off and say that this has been delivered. And I wouldn't mind knowing what the payback is. Now, let me give you an example. The IRD has estimated that for every dollar spent in debt collection, they get about $62 back. So they chase hard, and that's not a bad rate of return, you must admit. In fact, in the last FEC, when we questioned the Minister of Revenue, he said 62 might be a bit high. It might be closer to sort of 35 or 40. But it doesn't actually matter. If you're spending $1 and you're getting $35 or $40 back, that is an amazing rate of return. And I'm wondering for this, if the Ministry of Justice has done a similar analysis. For every dollar they spend issuing these or chasing outstanding fines, $672 million of those, I wonder what sort of return they'll get. Now, the reason I ask that is because it comes into this cost-benefit thing. That means if they put 10 people onto this, serving this, are 10 people over the space of a year going to be able to recover 50 million, maybe even 100 million? I'm not too sure. But this is simply a lot more than putting a letter in the mail to the person and saying, OK, in 14 days, you're stopped. And as my colleagues Rick Barker and Chris Farfoy have outlined, there are many instances of these young men and women, well, I assume there are some older ones as well, who believe they are immune, who believe that they can drive, it doesn't matter, they'll get pulled up, they'll get a ticket and they'll keep driving. That is simply not good enough, because as we said, it's about taking responsibility. But I'm assuming, and I could be wrong here, I'm assuming if a young man like Chris Farfoy, in the example he gave, is pulled over by a policeman, or a young, well, okay, let's not stretch the truth there, is pulled over by a policeman and it's proven that he has $10,000 worth of outstanding fines, is the policeman actually allowed to issue a warning on the spot there? Mr. Chair?
I call the honourable member Stuart Nash.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Because that would make it easier. That would make the process a lot easier. Because what would happen normally, because as Chris Farfoy said, the man was not drunk under the legal definition. So legally what happens is the policeman or policewoman issues him or her an infringement and they drive off. And what do they do with that ticket? Well, $672 million worth of outstanding fines shows this is what they do with that ticket. Rip it up, throw it in the back seat. And they forget about it until they're pulled up next time, or until they're pulled out next time, or perhaps until we fine them and they can go to court. And they get them to court. And so they get a fine in court. And they go out and they keep driving, they keep committing these offences. It is simply not good enough. So are the police actually allowed to issue a warning on the spot there and then? Because obviously a name has to go on that ticket. So after 14 days, that policeman will register the ticket, then the Ministry of Justice can go around and take that person's licence off them, or compound their car, which I actually think is a very sensible solution. This guy's got $12,000 worth of fines. Take his car, for goodness sake. He's got to take responsibility for those fines because these people have broken the law. And that is what our democracy operates under. And so, again, the Minister in the Chair, I think, is... OK, we're getting another Minister in the Chair. Just a little bit of an idea on how this is going to be policed, the sort of resource that is going to be put into this, because this thing will have no teeth. We all support this. Well, I don't know if the Greens do. But this thing will have no teeth if it's just seen as another piece of legislation on the law books to be filed away without the resource there necessary to chase it up and to really follow it up, because that is what is absolutely necessary. And I'll tell you what, I think that is what will send the message. That is really what will send the message. If a guy walks along to this sort of drag race and all his mates go, "Where's your car?" And he says, "Well, the police came around, you know, that new enforcement team that got in place, they came around and they took my car," and they go, "Oh, goodness me, that's rough.
Impotent.
That's rough." Because all his mates will have fines. If that isn't impotence enough, then they'll happen to the second chap and the third chap, until these young offenders start getting the message that they have actually got to take responsibility for their fines, for the $672 million worth of fines outstanding. And so there are some resource issues there, Minister. This will not have the teeth that we want it to have. It will not have the consequences or the outcomes that we would like it to have, unless there is the ability of the police to issue something on the spot, or the Ministry of Justice is going to divert some resource into this. But that cost-benefit analysis would be good, and I assume the Ministry's done it, because, you know, it may well allow them to up resource. Because, like I said, the IRD collects about 1 in 40. For every dollar spent, about $40. I suspect it's just as high with this. It may even be higher, because it's not as if we're chasing fraud. We're chasing people who have actually committed an offence. It's there in black and white. You don't need any, you don't need to take them to court, because they've been to court, they've been issued the fine, and there it is. But that is a slight concern I do have. It is a concern I do have. And Mr. Chair, I think you've heard, every Labor member supports this bill. It's a really good measure. It is a good measure, because $672 million, as my colleague Lynn Pillay said, goodness me, you wouldn't have to sell a power station if you got $672 million in. Well, you could have early childhood education back, even night classes. But it does, I think everyone agrees, it does require extra resource. There's no doubt about that. It does require extra resource, more jobs, maybe youth guarantee scheme, but I suspect it's going to have to be someone who has a little bit of training in this area. But it is good law. But a couple of questions there, Minister, that I wouldn't mind you answering. Thank you very much.
Cam Calder, Dr. Cam Calder.